Hi guys, we're going to start in just a couple minutes, or just 1 minute, 30 seconds. We're just going to let a few more people join. We've got some people rolling in right now. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Corey Lynn. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communication for CAPSM, and I'd like to welcome you to our first assessment and accreditation webinar of 2017. We did a lot of these in 2016. We're excited to get started again in 2017. Stay tuned for more of these throughout the year. Let me introduce our guest presenter today, Dr. Eric Deardorff. He's a management professor, he's a consultant, a nationally published commentator. His research interests include a focus on curricular challenges facing contemporary schools of business, as well as improving the effectiveness and evaluation of individual and team-level learning. His work has appeared in leading management journals, such as the Academy of Management Journal and the Journal of Management, as well as numerous industry and news media outlets, such as Bloomberg Businessweek, the Financial Times, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric. Eric, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Corey. I appreciate that. Always find it interesting that I have to live up to that reading, that description there. Hopefully I can. It's been doing a number of these over the past few months, and it really seems like CAPSM is developing quite the resource library around accreditation and learning assessments. That's pretty fantastic. I've been a pleasure to help out in that regard. So the topic of today's talk, or focus of today's talk, will be around this idea of results to reporting. The ultimate goal of what we're trying to do here today is to make your job in accreditation learning assessment more effective and more efficient. If we can get that done here, we'll have achieved a major goal. Along the way, even though we're talking about documentation and reporting, I believe that you'll find some other kinds of tips that'll help you improve your process in general as well. You know, it's an interesting topic to think about, this idea of result reporting and documentation of learning assessment, because oftentimes when we get to this point of the process where we get to we've collected all of our data, we spent all this time and effort and resources and sometimes often quite a headache of getting all this information, when we get to the point where we're analyzing it and writing it up, we often feel the substantial sense of relief. Oh, we're almost at the finish line, we're towards the end. And I don't know about you, I've been in those meetings before and talked with other schools that have been at that point as well. And it's kind of interesting how quickly that sense of relief fades when we realize, wow, our job is far from over when we're at the documentation stage. And a lot of that's because we think, well, it's just one big report, right? We just pull it all together. And what we think of one cumulative report actually is comprised of many more specific reports, presenting different kinds of information in different formats, and we have to take all of that information and not only compile it and analyze it, but make sense of it to ultimately write an effective accreditation learning assessment report for our reviewers. So if we're thinking about this idea of moving from assessment input to reporting output, we can make the assumption that we've collected our data, it's time to compile and crunch these numbers, we have good learning goals, we assess them as well as we could. But the fundamental question really becomes, when we're at this point, is beyond standard reporting templates that exist, what really makes for an effective learning assessment report? Look, accrediting bodies alike have these templates you can download, but oftentimes these only speak to the broader structure, not necessarily the content. You can certainly go on the web and look for sample reports from other schools. A lot of schools post their reports. But there, oftentimes, we might run into issues where what other schools have done doesn't quite fit what we're doing at our own institution. So what I'd like to do today during this webinar is really focus on the structure and content of effective learning assessment reports and stay at a level at which you could follow this and apply it to your own institution regardless of what your learning goals or your unique mission might be. So if we think about this idea of documentation, why do it? Well, the point here is we're really trying to document a robust process. We want not only our internal stakeholders to believe in this process, but also the external reviewers that come. So when we document this process, we're really trying to meet our assurance of learning requirements. And so you can see here, which I would imagine that many of you are well aware of the kinds of accreditation standards that apply to learning assessment. So here's the AACSB and ACBSP, so we have Standard 8 and Standard 4. You can see the idea, that the verbiage in here around well-documented, systematic process, the idea of documentations of results and evidence, and it's all around the idea of capturing and operationalizing data around learning goals with the penultimate goal of improving program quality. Now, when we look out and about at assurance of learning systems and learning assessment systems, there are some key success factors that can be built in that make these work very well. The extent to which you include standardized and rigorous assessment during that assurance of learning process, use multiple data collection measures that generate high quality data. These are the kinds of success factors that drive effective assurance of learning systems. What's interesting is most institutions recognize that these are success factors, but unfortunately very few design them into their assurance of learning systems. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why are we talking about this now when we're at the back end of documentation? Well, the real rub here is that if these kinds of characteristics have not been designed in your assurance of learning system, what often happens is it makes your job that much more difficult when you get to documentation. Because the key is you're trying to talk about the notion of a robust systematic process. And in general, if we think of the broad structure and content of effective reports, I'm trying to boil it down to the sort of the key sections that we want to see in effective reports. You know, there's 5 general sections of these kinds of effective documentation. The first 2, the description of the standard and the college mission and program learning goals, most schools have got this. Most schools have little difficulty with these 2 sections. You know, here's where you're describing verbatim the standards, whether it be Standard 8 for AACSB or Standard 4 for ACBSP. In the college mission, you're articulating your college's mission, your university's mission, all the different program learning goals that fall within the various academic programs that you have, and you're explaining why these goals matter, hopefully linking it back to your mission. Now, unlike those first 2 sections, these latter 3 are often where it seems schools tend to struggle, where the difficulty resides. And so I wanted to spend most of our time on these 3 sections where I think we can do the most, have the most impact and show the most improvement. And this is around the idea of just talking about your overall assessment philosophy, the learning goal objective linkages you might describe, and then ultimately the goal by goal results and action section. Now as we move through each of these 3 sections, I want to spend some time talking about the standard content, the things that people are going to expect to see, people as in your external reviewers. But then I wanted to go beyond just the standard content and talk about some key differentiators. And by differentiators, I mean aspects or features of reporting that will take your documentation from merely acceptable to truly excellent. So let's start with the first. So if we talk about this idea of what goes into the overall assessment philosophy, some of the standard content that you want to address in that section is talking about the rationale for how you're going to design your overall assessment approach. Emphasize standardized or high quality assessments, making sure you're measuring what you say you're going to measure. The fact that you capture different kinds of learning, so knowledge, skills, even attitudes, and the extent to which you use blended or multi-method data collection tactics. These are the kinds of things that people are going to expect to see in that assessment philosophy section. Now, there are ways to go beyond just the standard content to include what we call differentiators, again, moving from an acceptable report to an excellent report. So the extent to which you can integrate languages and references to the large body of literature and program evaluation, talking about how you're measuring for proficiency, for change, or for both. And by proficiency, I mean capturing data at the end of a program to show people reached a certain level of proficiency. By change, I mean capturing data across the program so you can show growth or learning acquisition, or you might do both, depending on the type of goal. And finally, including instrument technical reports as appendices if you use commercially available products. Now, I'd be willing to bet that many of you on the call have never really had any formal training in program evaluation, like taking a course on program evaluation. You would not be alone, and that's not that odd. Most people find themselves in the role of ensuring learning and engaging in program evaluation without formal training. What this means is that it makes it more difficult to initially start to do these kinds of assurance of learning, design, and then ultimately the documentation. There's a good news here, though, for those of you who don't have a doctorate degree in program evaluation, is that there is help. And the notion here is we're trying to describe a systematic rationale. So think about describing something that's systematic. Late last year, CAPSIM asked me to do another one of these webinars, and it was all around program evaluation. So you're in luck if you don't have a degree in this or taken formal training. You can go watch this webinar. And in here we talk about how to integrate the language from program evaluation. Look, there's a literature that's well over 60 years old in program evaluation. There's a lot of good material to integrate. How do you designate different forms of learning? What are the optimal measures or methods you use for different kinds of learning outcomes? And talking about different evaluation designs. And as advertised, if you can see that on your screen, I do believe it actually is in 30 minutes or less. Is it, Corey?
It is.
It is. So truth in advertising there. And that's available along with other webinars in the CAPSIM library on that URL you can see right there. Also, the notion is the extent to which you use commercially available products, and the ones you use should have technical documentation. If they don't, you might want to ask for that and be a bit worried if they don't have it. Because the idea here is you're trying to bolster and confidence that you're using robust and high quality measurements. So for example, if you're using any of the accreditation suite that CAPSIM has, which we use at my university, DePaul University, each of these products has a technical synopsis. Again, the key takeaway here is, in this section, is to show that you have a robust systematic process in place, that you're embedding it in program evaluation literature, and that you're using high quality assessment. If you do that, you make your job a lot easier with the assessment reviewers, because you're setting the stage that this is well thought out. So if we move to the next section, spend a little bit of time on improving the notion of linking your goals to learning objectives. So here's some of the standard content that should be included in reports here. This is where you talk about your college level goals, and then the different specific objectives and outcomes that are linked to each one of your academic programs that you offer in your college. Now, oftentimes here, there's a general description of the goals by program objectives, as well as how and why you chose these different objectives. Now, oftentimes people ask me, Eric, should we have these listed all at once? Should we do separate sections for different learning, for different programs? There is no perfect answer here. Do what works best for your school. So a lot of schools will break out separate sections of this, separate sections for each of their academic programs, especially if you have a number of academic programs, 6 or 7. It's just easier to take this section and couch it underneath each of those different academic programs. Again, that's really up to you. The ultimate goal is to make a clear, comprehensive, and understandable report that people can follow. Some of the differentiators here are make sure that the descriptions you use are well structured and well organized. You'd be surprised how oftentimes you look at different kinds of reports and it becomes very difficult to find information. And you often think, well, wow, a lot of these folks write very, very good journal publications, but when we come and apply it to our documentation, we may not apply that same rigor and structure. We want to make it easy for not only internal stakeholders to read our reports, but also those external reviewers. A couple other differentiators is include knowing and doing outcomes for all of your learning goals. So not just knowledge acquisition, but the skill application of that knowledge. And also talk about where these assessments occur. I'm always surprised. I've helped dozens of schools now, and it's really interesting that oftentimes in reports it's not articulated where these assessments occur, what kinds of courses. Again, these are ways of differentiating this section of an accreditation report. Now, there's a sort of a simple approach to leverage all of these differentiators to move from an acceptable to an excellent report. There's a way of what we'll call harnessing the magic of matrices, just so we can remember it. We gave it a little moniker. And so if you step back and think of how all of this occurs, your goal, your college goals, your program goals, all the way down to what you measure and the actions you take, we can organize this with a series of cascading matrices. So at the broadest level, let's talk about our links between our college goals and our degree program goals. You may even start higher and start at your university goals if you want. But the notion is you're starting broad. And so here we'll give an example at the graduate level. And here are five goals that are common to most business schools. Things around cross-functional expertise, communication skills, quantitative analysis and decision-making, something around leadership and interpersonal competence, and then something perhaps around ethical or legal issues in business. In our example here, you can see across these 5 general learning goals, they all apply to our MBA program, whereas 3 apply to our MS in Finance, and another 3 apply to our MS in Finance in an HR program. So it's a clear articulation of how our college goals link to our degree programs. Then we cascade further, and we link these program goals to specific learning objectives. So here, for example, we'll take our MBA program and 3 of those 5 goals, just for the sake of example. Here's where you customize that college learning goal with specific objectives that are relevant to that program. So for example, the first learning goal around cross-functional integration, we write a specific objective being able to strategically integrate information across various business functions such as accounting, marketing, operations, and so forth. We break out our communication skill learning goal into oral communication and a written communication objective. Then we break out our interpersonal competence goal into one around leadership and then one around the capacity to work effectively in teams. And so what's interesting here is many of you might be saying, well, wait, I already do this. And you are right. Most schools provide information on these first 2 matrices. This is quite common, but far, far fewer go a step further and link these objectives to the methods and location of assessments. So here you can see, for example, we'll take those different learning objectives we just reviewed, these 5 learning objectives, and here's where we talk about how and where the assessment occurs. So for the sake of example here, let's say for that first cross-functional integration learning objective, we use a simulation-based assessment called CompXM, and we also use a case analysis. And we do this in 2 different courses, our MBA capstone course as well as our marketing management course. For the oral communication, we use a multi-source feedback tool called CAPSIM 360, and we also use scores from an oral presentation. And these are from 2 different courses, a leadership course and again from the MBA capstone course. For written communication, however, we're using a term paper and an entrepreneurship course where students have to describe a go-to-market strategy, for example. And then if we break out those 2 objectives around interpersonal competence, our leadership-related objective, we're again using the multi-source feedback tool, CAPSIM 360, as well as a final exam, and both of which come in the leadership class. For group dynamics, the idea of being able to work in a team, in 2 different courses, we're utilizing a peer evaluation tool called Teammate to capture information about effective teamwork in financial accounting class and a marketing management class. So as you can see, we're kind of cascading down and becoming more specific. And so at risk of sounding like one of those infomercials on television, wait, there's more. Let's not stop there. Let's now link those methods to the actual metrics that are produced, right? The operationalization of those objectives. Very, very few schools dive down into this detail, but yet it's so imperative of writing an effective, comprehensive, and well understood report. So take, for example, that first learning goal and objective about cross-functional integration. Recall we said we're assessing that partly with our simulation-based assessment in the MBA capstone course. So during the simulation-based assessment, students are going through making various decisions in their simulated company. It's impacting all kinds of outcomes we care about in business, ranging from finance, from operations to employee learning and growth related outcomes, as well as customer success. And while they're operating in this simulated environment, They're also being asked test questions around various topics, ranging from break-even analysis and revenue recognition, all the way down to market forecasting and identifying price elasticity, for example. Now, this is a spot where some of you might want to put in your rubrics as well. So notice we're not showing rubrics here, but they could completely fit right in this aspect of the report as well. But it's also going beyond just mere rubrics. It's showing folks, internal stakeholders as well as external reviewers, precisely how you're measuring these types of objectives. And as you'll see in a moment, this really makes the interpretation of your data much easier if you have it organized this way. So just to kind of cap off a little bit more of this example to see how this might work, let's take those other two objectives that we had around interpersonal competence, the leadership objective and the teamwork objective. Recall we were assessing leadership in a leadership class using a multi-source feedback tool as well as an exam. So the actual metrics here we would pull from the 360, from Capstone 360, would be ratings from one's peers, managers, and direct reports across 5 key managerial skill domains. We also will pull information from 6 final exam questions that test students' knowledge on leadership theories, motivational tactics, power, influence, and these kinds of topics. When we're trying to tap into the teamwork objective, recall we're using a peer evaluation tool to capture this information from 2 classes. What we might do here for our metrics is take the scores on the team projects from those 2 different courses and blend those with student peer evaluations on 7 aspects of teamwork, as you can see listed here. The notion, again, of harnessing the magic of matrices is that you're really creating this cascading effect of from broad to narrow data. And the real value, what makes these matrices so magical, if you will, is that it forces you to think in a concise manner and to create a clear roadmap, not only for your internal stakeholders, other faculty with whom you disseminate the results, you yourself when you're designing and trying and implementing these assurance of learning processes, but also your external reviewers that are going to come in and look at the way you do what you do and how you do it. And this creates a nice clear roadmap to do this and organize this information. So now let's move to the final section that often gives people some difficulty and some obstacles in doing well, this idea of goal-by-goal results and action. So here we're really talking about analyzing information, right? You get all the data, you compile it, and you analyze it. Some of the standard content here needs to be clear descriptions and interpretations of the results and describing the action plans you're going to take. So what reviewers often want to see here are various descriptive statistics, so means, standard deviations, percentages, proportions. They want to see you talk about what the data mean, what are the trends, the takeaways, and talk about the actions that you seek to take. Now, in this section, there are several areas that can really differentiate your report to take it from a merely acceptable report to one that's truly outstanding. So just think about the way you might deliver information in your own academic publications or when you're doing consulting and writing white papers. So we want to use those same kinds of techniques in our own documentation. Apply those kinds of things that you do elsewhere to your assurance of learning documentation. So present data not just in text, right? Use tables, use graphical formats. Go beyond just descriptive statistics and include inferential statistics if you can, Cohen's d, odd ratios, correlations. And also talk about how you're going to disseminate and discuss the results, particularly with your internal stakeholders. This is one that a lot of accrediting bodies really are looking for but may not directly require you to do it. But this is one I often see pop up during reviews. So well, you haven't talked about how you share these data internally. And last but not least, having clear evidence-based actions to close the loop, so to speak. Oftentimes, schools write reports where they talk about the actions they take, but they haven't specifically linked it to the data themselves. That's key, clear evidence-based actions. I often tell people, look, do you think when you were doing your thesis or your dissertation you could have gotten away with just merely presenting descriptive statistics? I doubt many of our chairs would let us. So we have to apply that same type of rigor to the extent that we can in our accreditation documentation. So you might be asking, well, how can this be done? I just want to show some examples here of how data are often presented. So remember, we're trying to do it in a clear and concise way. Oftentimes you want to first start broad. Think about a comprehensive cumulative table where you're showing results across, cumulative results across your assessment period. So here, for example, let's say our assessment years were 2013 to 2016. So you're presenting various descriptive statistics like means, standard deviations, minimum, maximums, the number of students that are assessed for your various learning goals. Typically, schools that do this well will present various thresholds. So the percentage or proportions of students above different thresholds. Generally, you need to take it a step further here. Instead of just having arbitrary thresholds, schools often tie benchmarks to these thresholds, so benchmark interpretations. So, perhaps scores that are below 50% will designate as does not meet expectations. We might even have a description of what that means. Or 50% to 70% meets expectations, or above 70% exceeds expectations. Here again, I often get questions, well, what are we supposed to do, Eric? Do we have to have different benchmarks for different goals, or can we have the same benchmark for all of our goals? Here, do what fits best for your school. Accrediting bodies will not tell you what benchmark to set for any particular goal. What they want to see is that you've thought about your benchmarks, you can justify what those benchmarks are. And they can vary by each goal, or they can be constant across all your goals. Again, the idea here is you have to be able to explain why you chose that learning goal, or excuse me, that benchmark for a particular learning goal. But we don't just want to stop there. We want to go beyond cumulative results and tabular results. Let's think about our showing results that can generate trends and more readily help us interpret trends. So think about integrating graphical formats. So charts to better illustrate trends. You might look at trends over time for your overall program. So how well are we doing across our average scores on learning goals across time? We might plot out proportions of students that are above our benchmarks on various goals across time. Or if we're interested in assessing within program change, where we're taking a pre-test and a post-test approach, for example, we might also depict that graphically as well as compute inferential statistics such as a Cohen's d. The interesting thing, if you start thinking about presenting data in different formats, it also leads you to think of the data that you're collecting in a broader fashion, right? Not only cumulative results or by goal results, but how do these goals track and trend over time? This is really important because if you think of it longitudinally, it puts yourself in a certain mindset around the idea that you should continually revisit learning assessment, right? So you think longitudinally, it naturally puts you in that place where you're thinking of revisiting learning assessment across time. And ultimately, that's precisely what accrediting bodies want you to do. Think about continuous improvement. Think about doing this not just at the end of an assessment period, but doing it all along and making adjustments along the way. That's really what accrediting bodies are trying to get you to do. So I just wanted to pause a moment here and circle back to that last differentiator under this section of reporting. This is the idea of having evidence-based actions to close the loop. Now what's interesting here is oftentimes the point is we want to link clearly our actions to the data we see and make it easy for reviewers to see this. I think this is one of the times where oftentimes reason why people struggle is it might be a little bit of analysis paralysis. They have almost too much information and too much data that they don't know where to start, and they overthink it a bit. At the most basic level, this is going back and looking at the data that you have and what's trending. If you take that magic of matrices approach, it's forced you down to that metric level, right? It's forced you to know how you operationalize learning goals, which makes this step a little bit easier. And I'll sort of exemplify this with an illustration. So recall our program learning goal and objective we had for our MBA program that's around cross-functional knowledge integration, right? And so recall we used a simulation-based assessment called CompXM there. It had simulation decisions and various test questions that were being asked during the performance of the simulation. And so here once we've collected our data, we can very quickly just code these different topical areas, let's say the test questions, of whether or not students were below, at, or above our various benchmarks that we set. And I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see how clearly these trends start to appear. If we look at these various codings for the benchmarks, it becomes rather obvious that our students are in need of an intervention, or we might need to look back at our program in areas around financial accounting. For example, break-even analysis, understanding the accounting equation, revenue recognition, and issues of change and depreciation seems to be some topical areas where our students seem to be struggling in the MBA program. And so again, this is not necessarily the most difficult aspect when you get to evidence-based conclusions, but what happens is if you haven't walked down those cascading matrices all the way from college goals, program goals, to the methods, location, and then the metrics that you're capturing, it becomes a little bit more difficult when you get to the stage to interpret the results. If you've done that, it's actually not that difficult to go in and pull out these areas in need of improvement. Now, there are assessment products that are available that can make this easier for you as well, that can make this a little bit more efficient and effective for your processes. So for example, I mentioned CompXM just to give you a flavor of the kinds of commercial products and what they might offer for you to make this more effective and efficient. Here's the dashboard for the simulation-based assessment. From this reporting dashboard, you can download the raw data yourself. It provides the graphical and tabular results that we talked about were so important to integrate. If you use commercially available products, you can also get additional benchmarking information. I know CompXM tests well over 35,000 students a year, so you have this really robust national benchmarking data. There's a reporting interface through CompXM where you can self-service build your own report. There's a lot of resources around using this for assurance of learning that are available. When you're building this report, it'll give you the type of data we talked about that are important, so various descriptive statistics, proportions of students that are above or below various benchmarks, as well as graphical depictions that allow you to take deeper dives in understanding your data. So here they plot out knowing versus doing, so the decisions that you make in the sim and how effective they are versus the test questions that you're answering. The idea here is there are a lot of products out there that can really make this even simpler for you and make your process more effective. Now, we talked about a lot of tools and tips, and I try to show you many examples of how to do this at your own school. And we spend most of our time, again, on these bottom three sections because that seems to be where schools struggle the most. So hopefully you found something of use through the talk today, our short time together. It's interesting. You know, there are some very specific things that we can do if we think of our processes more systematically. And oftentimes during the documentation phase, it allows us to make more improvements on a forward-going basis the way we do learning and assessment. I would be remiss if I didn't mention at least an important parting thought here, and that is the idea of why do we even do what we do? What's our reason for embarking on this journey anyway? And so I'll pop back up our various accrediting body standards here, and you'll notice it's really about improving the quality of education. I know it may not feel like that when we're doing it. Believe me, I've been on these assessment committees. I've helped dozens and dozens of schools through this process. Often you're just trying to figure out how to do it and get through it. But we have to remember the ultimate goal of any of this is ensuring program quality, right? Taking that information we glean from a learning assessment and making evidence-based interventions to improve the quality of our education. And you might be asking, well, how can we do this? What are some of these interventions? Apropos, please join us for our next webinar in March. Capson's having me back on this very topic of interventions. How do we design evidence-based interventions? What are some examples of interventions that might be used, that other schools have used, that we might be able to use at our own institution? And that'll be the upcoming webinar that's occurring in March. You can see the title of it there. From results to action, what, when, and how of interventions. As Corey mentioned earlier, there's a whole library of these webinars around accreditation and learning assessment. So I encourage you, if you found any of this interesting, there's a variety of other topics, all in this shorter-based format for your digestion. Thank you for your attention and patience. I really appreciate it. I saw some questions came in. Feel free to pop any in now, and we'll hang around here and answer a few. And Corey, if people want a copy of the webinar, is there any?
Absolutely. We'll be following up with everyone that attended or just registered for the email early next week. I'd say Monday or Tuesday you'll be getting an email with a link to the recording. That will also give you an opportunity to register for the next webinar. We've got it tentatively scheduled for March 29th. If you want to just type webinar in the chat right now, we'll pre-register you for that, and you'll just start getting you'll get the reminders when it gets a lot closer to the actual webinar.
So I see one question coming in. That's interesting. So it says, I'll read it out loud here. It says, so you mentioned the idea of using the simulation-based test. How is that often implemented? So that's a great question. So yes, the one example we were talking about there is CompXM. It's one of Capsum's products. We've used it at DePaul, and it's, like I said, it's often used by a lot of different schools. I think the last time Capsum told me it was well over 35,000 students took it last year.
Yeah, we're at 40.
At 40.
Yeah.
So that's pretty amazing. The interesting thing about the simulation-based assessment is it can be used in a variety of different ways. So for example, at DePaul, what we do is we have it in our capstone class for undergrads as well as in our MBA program. And students complete the simulation-based assessment on their own time. So what we do is we give them a week where they can complete it on their own because it's online, so they can go in and engage the simulation-based assessment on their own. I know I've helped a couple other schools where Capsum's brought me in to talk to them, some large state schools, where they've done it in different formats, where they've had the simulation part done on their own, and then they bring students in a proctored environment to do the exam question portion. I've known other schools that have done it across 2 different exam sessions. So there's a variety of ways to implement it however it fits best to your schedule. Thank you. Hopefully I answered your question well there.
So we also have a gentleman that would like the slides as well, so we'll be able to provide those as well. So we'll give you access to the recording, but also to the a PDF of the slides that we presented today. Let me also say that if you're interested in learning more about some of the assessments that Capsum offers, like CompXM, Teammate, and Capsum 360, you can type demo in the question or the chat field, and we'll have someone reach out to you to talk about your accreditation efforts and how our products can help you achieve those. We'll give it a few more minutes. Here, good, we got another one come in. Does it integrate with your learning management system? Great question. We right now integrate with the top 3, Canvas, Blackboard, Desire to Learn. And Moodle is on deck, and then there's the 5th one as well. That's one of the things about Capsum products that we've been striving for, is to integrate with at the top 5 to start, the top 5 learning management systems. So we work with all schools to integrate our products within their LMSs.
Yeah, I can follow up with that too. You know, for my courses when I'm using it, it allows, the thing I like the most, it allows for single sign-on. So basically I'm putting in a link into we use D2L, and students, you know, once they log into D2L, they just click right through into the products. It's fantastic. Makes it a lot easier.
Can you read that one about the DePaul's? Okay.
Someone's asking, does DePaul have accreditation? Yeah, we're AACSB accredited. It's an interesting question.
That looks like about
for a demo. It's good.
Yeah.
So there's one other question, okay, coming in, and that is you mentioned the idea of technical synopses and technical reports for different products. If I want to use those or convince my dean that's a high quality assessment. Yeah, those are available if you just contact someone from Capsum. Just literally call in or email and ask for a technical synopsis, and they'll get it to you.
And we will send you a link. We're going to leave this open for a few more minutes before we close the webinar down, but thanks everybody for attending, and we hope to see you again in March.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, everyone.